Hey everybody, it's Gil here with the Sailing Vessel Dreamchaser, and in last week's episode we showed how to adjust a tight steering on an outboard dinghy, and even showed our method for cleaning hypalon. If you didn't see that video, I'll put a link right up here for it, and you guys can check it out. If you think it's useful, by all means, share it and like it with others. Appreciate it. In this week's episode, we'll go on and talk a little bit about how we started to prepare the surface for where the port's going to go. As you know, the boatyard's doing some fiberglass work on that part of it, and I went ahead and replaced the 3/4 inch plywood in there, and you'll see the method by which we did it. And the boatyard had come by, and they had done a little bit more work on the boat here. They prepped the rest of the fiberglass, faired it, sanded into this little corner here, this cove, and then ultimately primed it. And they always do this, I think I said this in our refit videos if you didn't see it. The yard likes to actually put a coat of primer on it, and then they begin to fair and sand it. It helps them see where the low spots are a little easier than just the fairing compound on the fiberglass itself. So that's what you're kind of seeing right here behind me. Let me see if you can see this. You see the gray primer. I am about to go to this port up here, and I'm going to use my router bit. I'm just going to get it smoothed out. I'm getting some of the sealant out of the old one, and then I'm going to go inside. I'm going to pull my, I have a barrier up there just to keep some of the dust and whatnot from going inside the boat while they were doing the work. I'm going to pull that out, and I'm going to measure a piece of 3/4 inch marine grade plywood that I have to put on the inside. Essentially, this Coachhouse wall, and from the outside is fiberglass skin, teak planks that run horizontally, and then there's 2 layers of marine grade plywood. The inside layer, the most inside one that's visible to the interior, was actually missing in a small section. It rotted out many years ago. I sort of cleaned it out a little bit, and now that I'm about to put this port in, before I put the glass in, if I get that piece cut, I should be able to clamp it on the inside of this with thickened epoxy, form it all into one single solid wall, and that wall will be a slightly smaller diameter opening than the exterior of the port. The glass beds right up against that. When they were doing the work on this, you know, one of those pieces of horizontal teak planks cracked a little bit, just from age and the work we were doing. So by putting this piece in there, that'll give me a nice solid backing plate to have the window, the actual port, mounted to. So about to get started with that. I'm going to take my my router bit, just with the largest flat bit, and I'm going to freehand this. And really, I'm just going to go, you know, unbelievably light pressure along it, and I'm essentially taking out the old 3M 4000. You'll hear a lot of people talk about marine grade sealants, 5200, 4200, and the one that a lot of people don't talk about is 4000. So 5200 is an adhesive, I call it devil's juice. Once it goes on, it doesn't come off. So there are certain applications it's great for, like below the waterline, but I don't like to do work on the top side with it, because if you ever need to get back into it, it's tough. It's tough to do. 4200 is the milder, more gentler cousin to 5200. Very similar. It's adhesive. It can even cure underwater, but it's a little bit easier to deal with if you have to take it apart after the fact, but it's still very tough. They also have something called 4000. It's sort of an equal parts sealant and adhesive. It's UV protected, and it remains flexible, or more flexible than some of the other ones. So when I'm putting in a port and potentially I have a little bit of wiggle or movement in rough seas or something like that, it's going to give a little bit more give and take. So that's what I like to bed the ports with, or at least these, because they are a sheet of safety glass bedded right into the actual wall itself. They don't sit within their own sort of frame or anything like that. Very different type of design than you might see in a brand new sort of cruising boat or production boat. Let me get the router ready and we'll get going. After routing the outer edge of the fiberglass, I now used the old cracked port as a template and just verified that it was trimmed back far enough. And you see I'm just kind of making a mental note here of where I need to expand the outer groove a little bit more. So after getting all of the port cleaned out, it was now time to take some measurements and build that inside piece of wood I just mentioned. I have a fairly intricate drawing here, but it gives me an idea on what I need to rough cut. I have some leftover 3/4 inch plywood right down here on the table, and it's now just a matter of rough sketching this out. I'm going to have to use a router as well because there's a couple of spots to get this to really fit in tight. It's a 3/4 inch piece of wood, but I need a 1/2 inch essentially tongue to fit in behind the edge of the bulkhead, down below into the edge of where I routed it out or cleared it out, and a little bit to go into the top as well. So I'm about to start doing that right now. All right, with my piece rough cut and back on the boat, you can see now I'm just dry fitting, and I mentioned I did this as a rough cut. You'll notice that it's covering part of the port itself, and that was by design. I want to get this essentially put in place and then draw a line on the outside so I get the right curve, right, the exact right curve that I want here for this backing piece of wood. And what you're noticing here is I'm realizing that it was impossible to have cut this in one piece that would fit because I essentially have a tongue on the top, the left-hand side of where you're looking at this, as well as the bottom. So what I essentially need to do is cut this horizontally in half so that I can wedge the bottom one down in that groove and then the top one in its groove. Yeah, let's go get this thing cut. Every time I edit and leave a camera running, I find little Swab doing stuff she likely shouldn't be doing. Look at this little thief. So now that I've went ahead and cut this piece into 2 different sections, you'll notice I'm putting this on here, and you'll kind of see this angle I'm doing here. I'm pushing it in the groove that is aft here, as well as in the groove that's down on the bottom side of it. And I'm just taking a little bit of a rubber mallet and I'm tapping it in to make sure it fits nice and tight before I ultimately put epoxy in place to secure it long term. Sorry for the video footage here, just the angle's not great with the sunlight in it, but again, you got to get the picture of what we're doing here. And again, it's just tapping it in place to make sure it fits good and tight, and then doing the same thing with the one up top. And you can see now I'm sort of tapping it into the left and then getting it to stop in the right spot. Then I traced the shape I wanted and took a jigsaw and rough cut them to the actual opening. Once that was done, it was just a matter of mixing up some thickened epoxy and then dry fitting these in place. I often do this. I start one of these projects with some thickened epoxy and then come a little bit to a realization that it's a little bit thinner than I thought it was going to be. And you gotta see me cleaning it up. I made a bit of a mess. And now you see Deb outside because midway through the project I kind of yell like, "Hey baby, can you glove up and help me out over here?" So she grabbed a couple of paper towels, and as I was clamping this to the existing portion of the Coachhouse wall, she was wiping up any places where the thickened epoxy was oozing out. But you can see I've got a bunch of these long bar clamps on here, and everything's good and tight. I've got it sort of tapped into the place where I want, and just double checking and making sure that the glass seat is just where I'd like it to go. So now it's just a matter of letting it cure. You know, some days you just have to embrace your inner redneck. So Deb and I have this Kawasaki Mule. It's a 4-wheel drive side-by-side. Essentially, 4 or 5 of us can sit in it, and we can use it for, just driving around in a campground or around the marina or whatever it is we want. It's been sitting in storage for quite a while, and it wasn't starting. I thought the battery was dead. So I needed to tow it over to our parking spot by the boat so I could hook up the battery charger to it. And this is where I mean where you have to embrace your inner redneck. So we towed it. It's a little hard to push because of the 4-wheel drive on it. So we towed it over there behind the truck, and then I went ahead and pushed it into the spot. You'll see how we went ahead and did that. But listen, we're sailors and we're rednecks, so fenders are for fending and bumpers are for bumping. Let's bump. That was kind of fun embracing our inner redneck, but now we went ahead and get the battery charger on the Mule and got that thing charged up. The very next day, we go back on board. We're going to start working on actually fairing the epoxy and smoothing the inside where I pieced those two components of the Coachhouse wall back together. This is Jack. He's our little escape artist, and every once in a while he wanders up on deck. Well, I stopped by and got a little bit of West Systems 410 fairing filler. Got my red Solo cups and popsicle sticks I like to use to mix. And I've got my in the dock box little bin full of epoxy. Well, there we go. So you'll notice down below I went ahead and used some just blue painter's tape, and I kind of put it around the edges of all the different spots where I need to fair between the old part of the Coachhouse wall and the new one. And you can kind of see where those different sections are there. I'm just doing that to try and avoid some of the cleanup and reduce some of the sanding I'll have to do. So you'll notice I actually like to use these sort of disposable products. I use a red Solo cup for epoxy. By the way, don't ever use these for fiberglass. Polyester resin and MEK, specifically the MEK, eats the red Solo cups up. But I use just a little popsicle stick when I'm first putting this stuff in, especially in small quarters like this. And I do it for a couple reasons. I have a few extra in my pocket, and I can kind of use it like a spatula to smooth things out. The other nice thing is when I'm up in a corner like you see me go into here, I press the thickened epoxy, or the fairing compound in this case, into the groove, and then I can use the rounded edge of the stick to create a nice little curve there to make it very nice and easy to smooth, and it looks good. Now, we're going to paint this side of the Coachhouse wall white. We're going to leave the beams wood and that decorative scroll piece to the forward side of that port. We're going to leave that wood and varnished in the end, but we're going to paint white around the sides of the ports themselves. So I'm okay with the fact that I'm fairing this over. I probably would have had to do a completely different job if I was trying to go ahead and varnish all this and kind of have it look like bright work. So let's finish getting all this fairing compound in the spots we need to. While we let that cure, we're now going to go ahead and hook the dinghy up, and we're going to tow it over to a little shop. The guy's going to go ahead and do a tune-up on it. I've just let it sit way too long, and I figured while I'm going to be out of town for a couple weeks, it's going to make perfect sense for somebody else to do a quick tune-up on it. Let's get this sucker connected up to the truck. Now with that fairing compound dry, it's now time to go ahead and start sanding it down and prepping that surface. I won't show all of this. I'll show you how I went ahead and sanded it smooth, but I did this ultimately 2 additional times. So I sanded it the first time and then found all of the low spots and went ahead and filled those again and then sanded it again as well. I just sanded the first coat of this. Let me show you what that looks like, and then I'm going to go mix up some epoxy and put my second coat on so I can sand it tomorrow and be ready for the paint. All right, let me kind of show you what I've got up here. So you can see this spot. I put tape across here, and I essentially filled this in with a fairing, and I have some more to put in there, but I needed this to get hard, and then I'll insert something in to hold it behind it. But it was nice to get that little skin right there, and a little bit of it leaked down below, so I got to sand this a little bit. But you can see here, instead of routing this edge to give it this sort of rounded edge on the inside of the window, I just went ahead and did it with the sander. Quite frankly, this is all going to be painted white, and you won't see that as much. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I went ahead and filled this little gap here between these 2 pieces of wood that we put in. And then up here, it's still a little bit rough, but I need to get fairing compound up along this edge and rounded. So you can see I had this stuff a little bit loose, and it sort of ran down a little bit. So the next batch I'll mix a little thicker, and then I'll sand right into this edge and all the way across to right here. And you can see there's a little gap right here. I'm going to have to build this up a little, and I'm going to make a transition that just sort of smoothly goes down to this section, just because this wood is just a little narrower than that wood. But I love this. This thing is good and solid, shaking on that like crazy, which is nice. And that will give me a nice edge to, if you kind of look here, you'll see that there's a nice edge here for that glass to seat right up against from the outside. I'll pull this, temporary cover off. We'll seal the window right in there. The decision was to go ahead and put the glass in, put a hose on it and some rain, make sure that it definitely sealed up our issue that we were seeing here. And as long as it did, then we'll have the yard come out and actually do the finish fairing outside and paint over with the finished paint. Right now it's just primed and temporarily held. I love this about the yard. Rather than just come in and do all that finish work, they're like, hey, listen, I know you still need to put the port in. You want to do a little work inside. Why don't we stop here? You call us when you're ready to finish the next part. But this gives you an opportunity to do it. And if there is any kind of issue, there's no sense in, having to redo all the finish work if we didn't need to. So that's the kind of stuff I really appreciate about Myers Yacht Service. They work with us, which is phenomenal. So let me go mix up some epoxy and get moving on this. All right, I went ahead and put another layer on here, and I will sand it a little bit later. You can see I filled the gap that was right in there and made that nice and angled. And then I filled it along this edge a little bit right in here as well. And we'll go ahead and get that sanded. So I think we'll go ahead and end the video right here. In next week's episode, we'll start to show how we get the actual port put on, and we'll get some more work done on the boat as well. Certainly bring you along for the ride. If you want to know how you can help us out and support our channel a little bit, the best thing to do is if you can go ahead and subscribe, or if you think somebody might enjoy it, tell them about it. Thanks a bunch, everybody, and safe sailing from Gil and Deb and the Grand Squids aboard the sailing vessel Dreamchaser.